I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome to Resiliency Matters. This is where we take the big resilience research and best practices and break them down into small bite-sized pieces that we can begin using immediately to strengthen ourselves and others. What if you could learn from an experienced fire chief who oversees resilience training for his department? Would you spend the next 28 minutes with us? What if in the next 10 minutes you could learn teamwork lessons from inside the firehouse? Would you hang out with us? Who is us? My other half today is Andy Oelson, Battalion Chief for the Cedar Rapids, Iowa Fire Department. Andy is not only an experienced firefighter, but he also oversees training for the department. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks, Molly. I'm glad to be here today.
Let's start going back almost 20 years. Why did you choose to get into emergency response?
At this point, I don't even really remember. I had an opportunity to participate in an EMT class when I was in high school, and I did that and ended up volunteering on the ambulance service in the local fire department in my hometown, and it piqued my interest and ended up spending a lot of time doing this sort of stuff, and was fortunate enough to be able to do it as a career now for going on 17 or 18 years. So.
Great. So what does resilience mean to you?
It's a great question. You know, I think a lot about resilience in terms of the fire service and kind of the ability to deal with difficult situations and handle things as they come up, and react not only quickly but thoughtfully, and figure out problems and then be able to go on to the next one in a healthy and thoughtful manner.
So what goes into that? That's an interesting definition of resilience. So making decisions under pressure and communicating under that type of pressure. Tell us more about that.
One of the really important things with the fire department is being able to kind of identify what's going on in a situation and develop a plan, and then be able to communicate that plan to the people around you. Our best firefighters and fire officers can analyze the situation, pick up the cues they're demonstrated in that situation, kind of relay them over the radio or in person, and then in a calm manner let everybody know that the situation is about to be under control, and to execute the plan that they've come up with.
You shared when we were chatting once that you can kind of tell how a fire might go based on the radio call. Tell us about that.
Right. So when the first engine gets to the scene, the first arriving officer will give a report, and you can oftentimes tell how the incident's going to go, because if it's an experienced fire officer who has a lot of confidence and has been to the fires before, they'll oftentimes get on the radio, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference if they're at the fire scene or ordering a hamburger from McDonald's. Sometimes folks, you can tell that they might feel a little bit overwhelmed or a little bit uncomfortable, and the volume of their voice will increase, or the tone of their voice will be really rapid, and they might not sound as organized. But the best of us, when we're performing at really high levels, you just can't tell that they're standing in front of a burning building with potentially people needing rescued, or that anything's really going on, because they demonstrate that confidence and their knowledge just through the tone of their voice.
How important are drills in getting to that point?
Drills are critically important. Fire and fires or emergency situations are a real challenge. And the only way to handle a big challenge is to be able to execute these really simple, repeatable tasks. So for instance, at every fire you have to pull off a hose line. It's relatively easy to put a fire hose on your shoulder and walk away from a fire engine when the sun's out and it's the weather's nice, and there's no burning building or anything in front of you. But it's a whole different deal at 3 o'clock in the morning, when there's people standing in the yard shouting at you to do things, and there might be other stuff going on, or a lot of other stressors, and so we want to be able to ensure that our firefighters can get off the truck and go to work. So we practice those really basic skills, like pulling a hose, putting on their air pack, putting on their face piece. We practice those and practice those and practice those. We talk about being able to perform the basics under any conditions, because that's really what it comes down to. If you can't get off the truck and be ready to work, then you're not going to be able to do any of the stuff that the public expects of their fire department.
Speaking of expectations, the high expectations are part of resilience, to have those high expectations, the support to keep growing. You're in a field that I think those high expectations from the community and from yourselves are built in. Is that something you need to manage?
Yeah, it can be a real challenge. So one of the things that I love about the fire department is a great level of government service. You know, somebody calls 911 and we show up. We don't ask any other questions other than what's your address, or you know, if we're really lucky, we'll get your address and the kind of the incident, and we send people out the door. And we try to have 17 people at anywhere in town in under 8 minutes, and we try to have the first truck there in 4 minutes and 59 seconds. And that's if you think about how hard that is everywhere in the city over years, that's a real challenge, and that's a really high level of expectations. And you have to plan, and you have to do lots of things to do that. Sometimes, though, we apply those levels of expectations to non-emergency settings, or when we interact with one another, we have to remind ourselves that the building's not on fire if you're ordering a T-shirt, or you know, communicating about training or something like that. So, you know, those high expectations are really important, but it's important, and it's difficult for us sometimes to figure out what is the really critical stuff that has a time component and what doesn't. And it's important to be mindful of that.
So as a training chief, I would imagine that's part of your message of take a step back and say, is this life or death, how I'm...
Yeah. I think the crews oftentimes will remind me of that, or, you know, and honestly, it's something that I have to be mindful of, that because it's hard work to be a firefighter. It's hard work to be ready to answer those calls, and sometimes I won't understand why the level of excitement about something that seems to me to be not an emergency, and then I have to remind myself that that's the kind of world that our folks operate in all the time, and it's important to me to be mindful and respectful of that work.
There's so much great tips in that, because where there are humans, there will be conflict. So there's some conflict management guidance for you. And here's your first takeaway. Confidence builds resilience. Learn what you need to know and practice executing it so you can do so even under pressure. Soft skills used by the toughest firefighters. Stay tuned.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. As a parent, you want to make sure that your child knows how to deal with bullying when they see it happening. And chances are they want to help, but they don't really know how. I'll teach them that the best thing to do is calmly walk away, find a teacher or other adult, and speak up. And do your part. Be that adult they can talk to and trust will listen. Join me to help stop bullying. Go to stopbullying.gov to find out more.
NFC, AFC, offensive linemen, defensive tackles, quarterbacks, and cornerbacks are all living united to ensure the academic success of millions of kids in our communities all the way to graduation day. But that won't happen without you. So take the pledge at unitedway.org. Make a difference in the life of a child. Suit up like your favorite NFL players and become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor with United Way.
G-Morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did. Are you on your way to the mall? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with Andy Oelson, Battalion Chief for the Cedar Rapids Fire Department. And Andy, you know, one of the reasons I'm so excited about finally having you on this show is because I have not only professional firefighters in my family, but a lot of EMT and volunteer fire departments. And they see a lot of stuff, and you see a lot of stuff. You're exposed to a lot of trauma. What role does debriefing play in letting that trauma move through you and allowing you to move forward?
You know, the idea of debriefing is the idea of that you get to talk about whatever the whatever the incident is to kind of help you process it and move it through your mind. And but it varies a lot. You know, in some cases it's simple as having a friend or a peer or somebody you can call and just and talk to about an incident. In our case at the Cedar Rapids Fire Department, we have a more formal program where we have peer mentors that have training in, you know, helping people talk about those things, but actually more importantly is realizing when someone's showing signs of PTSD or some other bigger problem that the peer can't deal with, and recognizing when they should call a mental health professional or kind of move that person up into a higher level of service. And then we also have like the formal debriefings for larger groups after particularly traumatic incidents, and they're all important, but it's really situationally dependent on what type of incident was, how many people were involved, and the kind of the different levels of comfort that the responders have with one another.
Because if it's not done correctly, you can actually do some damage.
Yeah, it's you know, and that's changed over the time that I've been involved in the fire department, and all of those different processes are geared around what level of comfort not only the peer counselors have, but the level of comfort that the person that's experienced the trauma has. It's certainly not something we would want to require anybody to participate in or kind of mandate or, you know, encourage them to do something they don't want to do, because you certainly can do a lot of damage if it's not done correctly or not done in the spirit of that it's meant to be done in.
And there's also differences, just even in our state of Iowa, between these small town fire departments and a larger city department.
Yeah, when I grew up in emergency services in western Iowa in a small town, most of the people that we interacted with, we knew. And if we didn't know the person that was having the emergency, we certainly knew their family or their friends or somebody that was around them. And so a lot of times you ended up identifying, or you could empathize specifically with that person. And that poses a challenge. One mechanism that a lot of people have is kind of separating themselves from the person undergoing the emergency. But when that person is your friend or your mother's friend or something like that, that can really be a challenge, and you end up feeling like you're dealing with their emergency at that time. That poses a challenge. The thing that I think that's more common in kind of our larger cities in Iowa is just the sheer volume of trauma that some of our responders deal with. Some of our folks are running 10, 12, maybe as many as 15 calls in a 24-hour shift, where they might see people that have undergone violence or multiple motor vehicle accidents, and just the sheer volume of that trauma can really be a challenge as well. But it is different in many cases from the small town to an urban area, is that just the way that it manifests itself and the experiences that people have.
So something that sounds soft, but I know from the research, and you certainly know from practice, that it's a core piece of resilience is vulnerability. How do you see this playing out in the firehouse?
Vulnerability is, there's a lot of different ways that it can manifest itself, but people have to be able to admit mistakes, and people have to be able to realize that there's other that sometimes you need help. You know, I mean, one of the things that we find the most resilient people we know are people that can go, boy, I need help with that, or I need to be able to talk to somebody, or they're able to take input and feedback in an emergency situation from other people around them. So not only does it end up being a kind of a personal health and well-being thing, it also makes for better firefighters and better police officers, because they can communicate under stress and under pressure. And part of that is being willing to admit that you don't know everything, and that other people can provide insight into whatever it is that you're doing, or can provide help.
So I imagine that can be a tough balance between confidence is essential to do your job, and vulnerability is that needed context, not white knuckling and pushing through, but
right,
openly admitting mistakes, learning from them. Do you have an example of how that might look?
Yeah, there's one of the things that we did was we would, after we'd go to a fire, we'd go to a big call, and then we would stand around in a group and kind of talk about how it went. And one of the things that we were able to not only demonstrate confidence, which is, like you mentioned, just a hugely important piece of emergency response, because it does take a kind of a special person to put them in front of a building that's on fire and say, okay, take care of it. You want confident, strong folks doing that. But the other way is you want people that can learn from what they do. So we would take the least senior person and have them start. And after the call, that we just go around as a group and say one thing that went really well and one thing that went different, or that you would do differently to learn from the incident. And so people demonstrated that they were professionals and knew what they were doing to their coworkers, and then they were also able to say, hey, this is what I would do differently the next time. And not only did they help identify that, that let everybody else know that everybody could improve. And then we went from the newest firefighter there with 6 months on the job all the way up to the senior firefighter who the last time I was doing this had 35 or 36 years on. And it ended up being a pretty helpful tool that a lot of people are still using.
So that brings us to another soft skill, and that's one of narratives, of co-creating your desired narrative or story. What role does that play between those veterans and the rookies?
Right. So, narratives and stories are really important to the fire service. The fire service has been around in the United States for a really long time, and in Cedar Rapids going back to 1860. And so these narratives not only put ourselves in a sense of position and time, but they're also great teaching tools. Because a lot of times in the business that we're in, something will happen one time, and then in 20 years it'll happen again. So we put senior people with new people, and we're intentional about them. We want them to tell stories, because when that thing happens again in 20 years, we want somebody there that has had that experience. And maybe that 20-year firefighter won't be there, but that person that has 6 months on will be there. And then that way they can both learn from that story.
The power of narrative. So here's your tool number 2. Resilience requires vulnerability. If you are comfortable in your own skin, openly learn from mistakes, and allow others to have your back, you will be more resilient. How 9/11 brought changes that we are still dealing with today. Stay tuned.
Hey, I'm Anderson Cooper. As a parent, you want to make sure that your child knows how to deal with bullying when they see it happening. And chances are they want to help, but they don't really know how. Well, teach them that the best thing to do is calmly walk away, find a teacher or other adult, and speak up. And do your part. Be that adult they can talk to and trust will listen. Join me to help stop bullying. Go to stopbullying.gov to find out more.
NFC, AFC, offensive linemen, defensive tackles, quarterbacks, and cornerbacks are all living united to ensure the academic success of millions of kids in our communities all the way to graduation day. But that won't happen without you. So take the pledge at unitedway.org. Make a difference in the life of a child. Suit up like your favorite NFL players and become a volunteer reader, tutor, or mentor with United Way.
Morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. Text me. Are your parents home later? We can hang. LUV, love you. JK. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you with your friends? That's lame. We're in a huge fight right now. XO. What'd you dream about? Something I did. Are you on your way to the beach? I'm lonely. Nude pics. Send me some. Text me.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mollie Marti, and welcome back to Resiliency Matters. Today we are speaking with Andy Oelson, Battalion Chief for the Cedar Rapids Fire Department, and we are talking about resilience and lessons from inside the firehouse. You have seen a lot of change in your culture over the years, I think most striking since 9/11. Talk us through some of these.
I think the thing that's most striking to me is prior to 9/11, the fire department was a good city job. And that's how we were viewed in the public. And after 9/11, it was an interesting time because people would come up and thank us for our service or offer to buy coffee or something like that. And the dynamic around being a firefighter really changed. And that, it was it was just it was an interesting time. And then we've also seen changes in the way that we hire firefighters and the way that firefighters interact with one another. And we've made changes. So we used to have large bunk rooms where people all slept in the bunk room. Well, now there's all individual bedrooms at the fire stations. And it's changes like those that end up having impacts on the group and on the organization that sometimes you just don't expect. But there was a lot of change, and it's continued to change.
So the shift from the bunk room, that's also because more women or a different type of people being attracted to firefighting?
Right. Certainly some of the push came when more women became involved in the fire service, and that's been a huge improvement. And then also people's just expectations of privacy. I think a lot of people going back were oftentimes they were from the military, and that was part of the culture. And now with people's expectations of privacy, they expect to have their own space, whether they're men or women. And as an organization, we have to respond to those needs and wants to make sure that we get the best people possible.
And as usual, these type of changes can be or are double-edged swords, right? They bring good things. I think your service is better with women. I can say that.
100%.
And right? People will agree with that diversity, and yet there's some new challenges that you don't even see coming, right?
Right.
What has that looked like?
One of the things that firefighters have noticed is after a bad call or a really challenging incident in those large bunk rooms, people used to talk about the call. And they would rehash it, and they would go over it, and they would talk about it, and it gave people an opportunity to have that discussion. With the kind of individual bunk rooms now, it's much easier for people to isolate themselves, and it's also harder to get a chance to interact and talk to those people. So you don't even always know what people are dealing with. So what ended up as being a change that needed to happen, it also as an organization, we've had to be really intentional about managing interactions with people and encouraging people to interact with one another while they're at work. And in the past, it just happened because of the way the buildings were designed. Now it's a much more intentional practice.
And you've also had some changes on the nature of calls you're responding to.
Yeah, the volume of calls is up. I believe the fire department was responding to about 4,000 calls a year. When I started in 1999, last year we went on nearly 12,000 calls, and we had about 16 or 17,000 individual trips by a fire apparatus. So the volume has increased. The number of times that crews are getting up at night has increased. That's hard on people. And then just the seriousness of the calls has also increased. And all of those things have had an impact on resilience.
You mentioned even when we were chatting about something that might have fallen traditionally to social services has now shifted over to fire departments.
Right. So a lot of times now, if in Cedar Rapids, if you have fallen down and you're unable to get up, you call 911 and you call the fire department, and we're the ones that come help people get up at night, or get off the floor, or do some stuff that may have been in the home health aid arena kind of in the past. And now that those services have changed, the fire department ends up having a bigger role in the delivery of those services. And that's kind of a different expectation than when people get hired for the fire department. They often think, we're getting hired to go fight fire, to save lives and do these things. And then sometimes at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, when you have to go out and you help somebody off the floor, it's a critical service, and I'm glad that we do it. But it does pose a challenge, because that kind of service wears people out. It makes people tired, and when you get tired, you start to really negatively impact your resiliency, and it's hard on people.
Mm-hmm. Because that call might be followed by a big fire or a 5-car accident.
Right. Yeah. There's no room for error anymore. In the past, if you talk to the older firefighters, they said if they got up at night, we knew we were going to a fire. That's just the way it was. Now we'll get up 3, 4, 5, or more times in a night for less critical calls, and then after the 5th or the 6th call, you might get up, and it might be fire coming out the windows, and that changes the dynamic because you're already tired going in. And then you have to have your mind working and your body working, and it's hard.
So while I think this is such a great conversation to always be looking at those changes, and yes, much good coming from them, but we're creating some additional challenges. What do we do about those? But on that macro level, what's most important as far as that micro level of building resilience? So if you guys and women in the fire department are being woken up, what do you need to be doing to stay on your game?
Yeah, a lot of the stuff that builds resilience is the stuff that your mom told you to do. You have to get enough sleep at night, and you have to get enough sleep at night when you're at home. You have to exercise. You have to eat healthy. You have to do those things that are, like we said, is what your mom would tell you to do if she was giving you advice. And those things really do end up impacting resiliency. If you're tired, you start to make bad decisions. If you're hungry, you start to make bad decisions. So you have to do those basic self-care items to be successful.
Go back to the basics. That's always good advice. One factor of resilience is hope. We call it vision, but it includes hope. It includes co-creating that meaningful future. What role does that play for firefighters?
I think it's really important. I think I know for myself and a lot of my colleagues, one of the things that we like about the fire department or emergency services in general is that we know that no matter what happens today, when somebody calls 911 tomorrow, somebody else, whether it's us or our friends or our colleagues, are going to answer that call. And we know that some days you have bad days and they don't go as well. But there is a great deal of hope and a great deal of confidence and pride in knowing that no matter what happens today, when somebody calls 911 tomorrow, we'll have people out the door. And that ends up being really important on a number of levels.
So such a great sense of we're in this together, tomorrow's another day, and keep moving forward.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, here is our third tip. The greater demands, the more you need to practice the basics like sufficient sleep, nutrition, exercise, and time with loved ones. Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. We have some great tips, and they go so well beyond the firehouse, so I appreciate your help.
Glad to. Thank you.
And thank you to all of you for joining us on Resiliency Matters on MediaCom MC22, your local programming leader.